Welcome back, right? We are on chapter 8, right? We are down to our second to last reading for the school year, so that's got to feel good. We're talking political geography today, right? We're going to talk about where states are located, right? And then we're going to talk about some boundaries, right? Some boundary issues, right? And we're talking about boundaries between countries, not boundaries between, proximity to people in this.
So look at how states are defined here. We have the term state. We don't usually think of it as we need to define that, but the way we define the term state is like a province. The term state of Minnesota is not technically a state. A state is a country, essentially. A state is a sovereign political unit. So the United States is a state. China is a state. Minnesota and Wisconsin are territories or provinces. We just use the term incorrectly. So when we talk about some of the problems defining state and the idea of countries here, Korea is an issue. Korea was divided at the 38th parallel after World War II, and so that creates it. The North was communist, the South was democratic, and that creates problems there. China and Taiwan is a problem when we talk about defining the term state because they have separate governments or had separate governments after the 1940s. The nationalists or the democratic side being part of Taiwan and the communist side taking a portion of China. Taiwan believes that they are independent. China does not, and the United Nations does not recognize Taiwan as an independent nation. Lastly, we have Western Sahara as another big one. It's claimed by the neighbor Morocco. It was annexed by Morocco after the withdrawal of Spain in 1976, but the United Nations has not recognized Western Sahara as an independent nation.
It's not a big country. It's kind of a big sandbox, right?
Yes.
Kind of the most interesting thing right here is that think about Spain, right? Owned Morocco until 1976. That's not that long ago.
No, it's not.
Right. So there's Korea before and after. There's the 38th parallel. They fought a war. American involvement too, right? Where we had some 50,000 people die. And then, so they're essentially the same, right? There's a ton that, you learned about North Korea last year in your social studies class and your English class, so you should know, right?
Another look at the DMZ from close up here. Right. There's a difference between North and South Korea when we look at the lighting and the development level of the two of them.
That's Pyongyang right there.
Yeah, there's the capital of North Korea, there's the capital of South Korea, and obviously major differences here. It's probably tough to see on the screen, but there is a country here. It's just
pictures in your book. It's an awesome picture. It's one of my favorite geography pictures right here. It's China and Taiwan. Again, look at Taiwan, right, being also militarily, right, being off the coast of China. So the Chinese government really wants to control that. Sometimes they call Taiwan the world's largest aircraft carrier, right? Here's Western Sahara. Again, not many people.
And like you said, kind of a big sandbox.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about this. These will pop up, right?
Sure.
Things like the law of the seas, right, and all of that. So, North and South poles, right? Only large landmass, right? The South Pole is the only large landmass that is not an established state. It's kind of the only kind of frontier land that exists in the United States, in the world. Everything else has been claimed, right? But many countries have claimed it. There's conflicting claims right there. People want to use it for research, right? Again, we look at these not necessarily being recognized by the United States and Russia, and we have an Antarctic Treaty of 1959 that allows research stations, but no military bases there, if you think about that, right? Military strategy in this Cold War era, 1959, so there's that, right? The North Pole, though, operates by the Law of the Sea Treaty, right, which allowed claims until 2009, right? People are looking at potential resources there, particularly in oil and natural gas. We have some claims. There's many disputed claims there as well. All right, so there's control of polar regions, right? And this is about projection, right? You see that planar projection on the map, right? There you go. Right? There's the law of the sea. The law of the sea is important, right?
It'll definitely be on the test, guys, for sure.
200 nautical miles, right? That is the exclusive economic zone of a country. So if this is your land, right? This is the coast, right in here, right? And there's the beach right there, and this is where you got 12 nautical miles right out here. You get exclusive economic zone out into, means that the another country can't come and fish your water. The water's right outside of your area, right? Then we get into international waters, and it's no holds barred, right? It's funny, right, that you have these different territorial waters, and it goes, from 12 to 24 out here all the way out. There's a certain amount of control of your on your coast.
Take a look at it in your book. Know it, because like you said, it'll pop up on
Yeah, this one's going to probably pop up. We would guess that. All right, so how does size matter here, right? Well, we have our large state being Russia. Again, this isn't anything that you didn't already know.
Territorially.
Right, territorial. This is land-wise, not population-wise. Keep in mind, a large amount of Russia is that Siberia, which is largely, barren in its inhabitants, right? Again, we look at Canada, U.S., China, Brazil, Australia as being our big ones. Small states, right, is Vatican City, right, which is the head of the Catholic Church, which is inside Rome, right? So it's a country within a city within a country, right? Odd but true, right? And then you got 0.2 square miles is a couple blocks, right? And then you have Monaco, right, is the UN reference point, right? Because Vatican City, because it's a theocracy, it's not a political entity, right? So 24 states across the world, places like Andorra, Liechtenstein, many of those are going to be tiny little island nations out in the Pacific, those Micronesian, Indonesian, Negronesian islands in there. All right? So we get into the concept of state, and we get into a little history here. We're going to kind of crush this one, right?
We'll go quick.
Again, the idea of a sovereign state is very recent, right? Talking about city-states. We've already talked about city-states in terms of urban geography, so we can skip that. Again, we look at European states coming from the Roman Empire.
City-states developing.
And we get feudal. More on that next year, really, when it comes down to it.
Quite a bit more.
Right? There's some maps of that stuff. I think we move on. There's a city-state right
Walled
there.
city.
Yep. And so then we get into the world's land. We look at colonies, right? Land legally tied to a sovereign state. Colonization, imperialism is not anything new to you. You should have working knowledge of that by now, right? Level control may vary, right? It can go from, like we have territories, in places that we don't necessarily control. There's a lot of autonomy in some places. Other times they're really under the thumb of that government, right? Again, we get into the 1400s, right? And we look at European colonizations. We look at the three motives, the three G's: God, right? Conversion of people to Christianity, right? Gold, right? So there's an idea of mercantilism. The idea that there's only a finite amount of resources, including gold, and this is how you build, right? And then glory, right? People were moving to, for the glory of their country. So these conquistadors, these explorers were going that way.
Last time we talked about the colonies in Africa. We also talked a little bit about how imperialism shaped the Middle East as well, and Asia. So back to those things we've already talked about.
Yeah. We can talk forever about this. We're not going to. Again, we don't have a lot of colonies today, right? We see a lot in the Caribbean, right? Like the U.S. Virgin Islands and stuff like that. We'll see a map here coming up, right? There's colonial powers in 1914. Keep in mind that the United States, right, controls the Philippines at this point, right? So yeah, we're a colonial power. We like to think it's easy to blame the Europeans for all that stuff, and largely that's true, right? But we have our own stake in this.
We're definitely involved.
Look at things like Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, right? Our United States territories, right? You got St. Kitts and Nevis and those places, and Montserrat. So
pretty much all of them that we see today are going to be islands, small island states.
Right. And we have some over here, like the Jarvis Island, etc. There you go. Anyway.
State shapes, guys, something that used to be a really big deal. It's not as big of a deal anymore. I would just be familiar with the different concepts of the state shapes here. What we have: compact, perforated, and fragmented. It most likely will not appear on the test at this point. Recognize, though, is the idea of landlocked states, the idea of a country that has no direct access to the sea or water in any sense here.
This is a situational disadvantage. It's a have a port, right? We can go on.
We don't need that, yeah.
Right.
So there's, keep going. So again, these are all examples of these different state shapes, not on the test.
You're not, it's perfect.
Here's what you should probably know, though. Again, the landlocked states in the world, there aren't that many states that don't have some or sea, and you can see those states right there that are. It makes it obviously an economic disadvantage for them to be locked in.
Just take these two for example, right? Bolivia and Paraguay are not the economic juggernauts of Latin America, right? Argentina, Brazil, most other countries there. Laos is the poorest country in Southeast Asia, right? And do you think it's all right? talking about where the capital city is located when it comes to cohesion, right? It's often the largest city in the economic center, but not always. Take a look at the United States, right? The largest city is New York. The economic center is New York, but it is not the capital. It's not even the capital of its own state, right? It once was our nation's capital. We did move it, right? And we had a forward capital and things like that, right? Again, it can impact communication, unity, and development, right? It tends to be centrally located, right? Ideally, it tends to be located so it's close. It's equally distant to everybody. That's not on one side of the territory or the other. Again, we look at relocation. We look at the United States, right? Washington, D.C. became the compromise between North and South. The southern states did not want a Philadelphia or a New York to be the nation's capital. They wanted something a little closer to them. Canada, right? Ottawa is not in Quebec, but it's very close, so it's a good compromise there in terms of appeasing the Quebecois, right? India has moved from Calcutta to New Delhi, which is more centrally located. That's also a reflection of colonialism, right? Because that was a built city by the British. Brazil moved from Rio on the coast of Brasilia out of the jungle. You saw that and urbanized. And then Nigeria, right, has moved from Lagos to Abuja, which is much more central. And again, like the Nigerian conflict is the stuff that goes on in Nigeria is, clearly Lagos is the bigger city. It's one of the biggest cities in the world, right? And Abuja is relatively not, right? There's Brasilia right over there, right? The Niedermeyer developed building right there, right? And then we're getting, sometimes you have multiple capitals. Bolivia has Sucre and La Paz, right? South Africa has, Pretoria and Johannesburg.
Yeah. And they divide up the government.
Cape
Some
Town.
of the government's in one place, some of the government's in another place.
Mm-hmm.
South Korea is working on a similar idea too.
To keep themselves closer or further away from the North Korean border, right? Because they fear invasion. Right. There's your
Look at
capitals.
our states' capitals. Again, remember, we're not talking about our states as states, political sovereign units, but we are talking about them. And you can see a lot of the states, the capital city tends to be fairly centrally located. Not always.
The Dakotas are a good example of
Very
that.
good example.
Right?
Yes.
They're not the most important cities.
No, definitely not.
Right.
But they are
Bismarck.
central.
Yeah. Not more important than Fargo. Fargo's right there, right? Most important city, but it's so far away. It's going to it's going to isolate the Western farmers, right? Particularly if they're serving in the legislature, having to travel all that far, right? When those are created, sometimes they are the most important. City. You take Phoenix, you take Denver, you have all of those, right? Are there other times you have weird ones like Carson City, right?
Right. There's your move from Lagos to Abuja, right? When we look at Nigeria, and again, it's just more centrally located. It's better for everyone in general. It doesn't cut off communication.
And it keeps people happy.
We already talked about Ottawa, the shift over to Ottawa, right?
There you go.
We look at some of the borders. When we talk about borders and how borders are set up here, we have the physical boundaries and the cultural boundaries that are established here. So our physical boundaries, we talk about deserts, mountains, water, rivers would create a physical boundary here. Cultural boundaries are going to be usually man-made boundaries of some kind. So geometric.
Straight lines.
Yes,
Right.
Religious. They could be language boundaries, which we've looked at on a couple of them
So
already.
you got some cultural ones right in
For
here,
sure.
right? But then geometric is going to be just that straight line, right? The difference between the Iowa border between Iowa and Minnesota and Wisconsin, right? Minnesota and Wisconsin's on the river, right? So we'll take a quick look at a Minnesota map and practice that.
We've also got frontiers, uninhabited areas that are just the border.
They don't really exist in a lot of places. They only exist really in like between Yemen and Saudi Arabia, Yemen and Oman and
Deserts.
Saudi Arabia, right? It's a big empty corridor over there, right? So here you got a physical border in the Red River, right? And after that, start of that one, you see these geometric borders, right? Straight lines, right? Straight line, right? Straight line until you get to, right, the St. Croix, right? You got another straight line. Then you got the Rainy River and Lake Superior all the way up in here. And then we look at that Canadian border, right? Which is just a line. There's a border right there, and it just happens, right?
Looks like this.
There it
Right
is,
there.
man.
Northern Minnesota. You can walk right across the line.
Super secure, isn't it?
Right.
All right. Again,
Then we've got others, the four corners, obviously, definitely man-made geometric boundaries there. There is the biggest tourist trap I've heard anyway. I've never been there before. Have you?
No, I've never been there.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, biggest tourist trap ever. You can go and stand in 4 states at once, or like this little girl lay in 4 states at once.
And actually, it's about 100 years off, or 100 yards off.
Yeah,
right?
it's not exactly right.
Yeah.
There's our empty quarter area that we talk about. There's the frontier where there's literally nothing there, and so it's just part of the border area.
Doesn't much matter. Yeah.
So when we look at internal divisions, we talk about unitary and federal states. So when we talk about unitary states, we're talking about the idea of most of the power is going to lie in the central government itself. And over time, it works really well in like large nation states. It's really common in
small
Europe
nation states,
right.
small unified people. Yeah.
And so when we look at federal states, that's what we tend to see here in the United States. The power is shared at multiple levels. So you've got the federal government, you've got the state government, you've got a county government, and then you've got the local city government. So they're all there. I would know that.
And this works well, right? And don't get federal. People tend to think of the federal government as being unified, right? Don't get these two confused. It happens a lot with AP students. Just keep in mind, though, right, that you don't want the same laws to apply to Louisiana as you do to Minnesota, right? We don't want that. We want to do our own thing over here. They want to do their own thing over there. What works for them doesn't work for us. What works for us doesn't work for them, right? And so that's why you have this division. It works well in big countries. It works well in countries that are diverse. It works well where there's, where there's a lot of fracturing going on, or multi-ethnic, right? Multinational countries. There you go, right? There's a word, right?
We talked about it.
Breaking up of a state, right? Or the relinquishing of autonomy to internal units. So it's not necessarily everything blows up. Sometimes it's just, hey, this part of the country is going to do. They're really going to be tied in with the rest of the country, right? Again, balkanization being kind of the best example, but also a fairly extreme example, right? So we see this, right? The territories in Canada are autonomous, right? Yeah, they're largely indigenous populations up there, and so they're allowed to do their own thing, and Canada leaves them alone, and they kind of run things the way they want to. You'll see that also here in the Northern Territories, which are largely uninhabited too. This is the outback in Canada, right? Largely indigenous population that you have the Aborigines there, right? You see this in the UK with Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. They don't have to do the same thing as England, right? And then you're also seeing this in...
You've talked about them already.
Here's a good example right in here. The Catalans are looking for more of that. They're fighting, right? They're actually fighting for true kind of balkanization, right? And devolution.
They want to divide from Spain.
Right. And the Basques as well. The Basques have been at it forever, right? They want their own place. Again, linguistically very different, right? Different language in Catalan as opposed to Spanish. You got economic concerns, you got cultural concerns, all sorts of different things going on. All right? So take a look at our types of governments, right? Just to understand what democracy is what we're used to, right? Where you have elected officials. You have an autocracy, right? Which is run by the ruler rather than most people. And we tend to think of those as kind of our dictatorships, right? And then we have an anocracy, kind of a mix of both of those. So a couple terms for you to think about as you go through here, right? There's various divisions. There's your Canadians, right, where you got your provinces right here, and then you got your territories up here, and these are going to be largely autonomous, right? And linguistic differences as well. So, Canada's a unique thing, right? There's Germany, which has its little things right there. Notice the perforated state of Brandenburg with Berlin there, because Berlin is a huge urban area, right? There's your Northern Territory and all of that. You see Mexico being very divided. There's China, too.
So all of them using different terms, states, provinces, territories.
Yeah. And again, we look at the rise, right? If you look at here, you see democracy, right, has gone up as the world has moved forward, right? In history, you're going to see more of that. Hey, I'm not in the picture anymore. There I am, right? Social distancing from Mr. Star. So I think we're good. You're seeing a little less of autocracies.
Yes.
This, take a look at North Korea, take a look at Iran, right? And you have theocracies, which are run on religion. So there's other things to think about. All right?
Different regimes throughout the world.
Yep.
Arab Spring, 2011.
You saw autocracies go down, and you saw democracy start to rise with that. Okay. Good examples there. Gerrymandering.
Ooh, this is a good one to get into here. So when we look at gerrymandering, we have all kinds of things we can look at. When we redistrict, and actually, hopefully, you guys got a census recently in the mail, or your family did, and you're going to be going through the census. And when that happens, they go through and redistrict all the congressional districts for our nation. And as they do that, a lot of times what will happen is we get to the term of gerrymandering, which is this idea of you are going to split up votes in a way that's going to benefit whatever party is in place in the time. Right?
Democrat or Republican.
Right, the majority of the party here at this point. So when you look at, we have a couple different ways to do it. We actually have a video clip, guys, that you have to watch as well here. I would take a look at that video clip. I would know it. Gerrymandering is one of those things that pops up on the test. Definitely, it'll most likely appear on there.
It was an FRQ a couple years ago.
Yes, so I would take a look at it. There's different ways. We talk about the idea of wasting the vote. So in this case, the red stays in one specific district. You can see how large this district is, and it encompasses a strange shape here. We've got this one where it's the excess vote, where you're throwing all the blues into one spot so that they can only carry the vote in District 3 here. We talk about stacking the vote here, so you have more red people voting in all these other districts. You can see how strangely shaped these districts are. That's where the term gerrymandering comes from.
Slim majorities here, slim majorities,
yes,
right?
exactly.
But just enough to win, but not enough and then they're isolated from this area.
Yes. Right. And so if you look at Minnesota, does Minnesota have any gerrymandering going on? I would say it probably does, especially if you look at this giant purple area here that wraps all the way around the state, right? You even get this area that kind of slides up into like the St. Cloud area. Our area is part of St. Cloud as well.
At one point, Stillwater voted with St. Cloud.
Yeah.
Right?
So,
now, Stillwater and Woodbury are very different,
yes,
right?
for sure.
Than that area. And when Cottage Grove was in a different, they voted in a different district.
And this one, part of Cottage Grove, and this is still the way it is, part of Cottage Grove votes with Hastings and Red Wing in this area, and the other part of Cottage Grove votes with St. Cloud and Stillwater and Maplewood and Woodbury. So districting. But if we look at this one, is there any gerrymandering going on here? Probably not. Iowa's pretty straightforward. You can see they've kind of divided the state into 4 quadrants, and that's how it goes.
Again, they have to take population in mind, right?
Yes,
they have
that's
to
why
have
we have these little add-ons.
Yeah, that maybe this one gets that, so it's not, there's going to be some funky shapes here.
This is slightly smaller because you're going to get into what they call the Quad Cities over here, which is not too far from Chicago.
But it's more populated.
Yes.
Right.
And so here's some of the examples of gerrymandering that we've seen. This is the 12th district of North Carolina. All right, definitely been gerrymandered. I mean, it looks like a river.
You'll see that on your daily quiz.
For sure. Yeah. Here's another one, Maryland's 3rd district. We've got Illinois. And then we look at Pennsylvania's 7th district, which they see Goofy kicking Donald Duck.
There's Goofy kicking Donald.
Yep. I don't know if I really see it all that well, but maybe
I see Goofy. Yeah. I don't see Donald.
No,
there.
I
That could
see
be
that.
anybody.
I agree. And that's it. All right, so watch that clip, guys, about gerrymandering. Definitely, it's going to appear on the test somewhere, and so I would check that out. That wraps up Chapter 8, Key Issue 1 and 2. We will see you next time for our next one.
Be good.